Welcome to the OK, Let's Learn podcast. This is where we have two podcasts in one, where we read great stories and go over great books in our OK Book Club, and where we dive into tons of different topics and people. So today, OK, let's learn and read the last episode on Lost Evangeline. Book 5, Episode 6, a look back on this great book by Katie DeCamillo III in the trilogy of the Normandy Tales, or as apparently it's pronounced, the Normandy Tales, and I've been just saying Normandy Tales all the way through. At this point, it's been said so often that I'm just going with it. And before we dive into this book, everything about this book, best, worst, interesting moments, characters, everything you can think of, we will talk about. In the book club series, as a part of my podcast, the other books that you may be interested in that we've gone and done deep dives on is the second book in the Normandy Tales. That's the Hotel Balzar. The first book is called The Puppets of Spellhorse. I will have future episodes on that particular book, but we've also dived into The War That Saved My Life, the other book, The Lost Library, and currently we are also diving into The Invention of Hugo Cabret. All great books, and I encourage you to go back and look at future episodes, and these are books that you can read. The idea is you read and then come back to the podcast and listen and reflect, and we can read, ultimately, these books together. But Lost Evangeline, here we go. Overall, the rating. I always rate the books from 1 to 5, and you know what? It's right up there in the top. Got to be in the top 10, 15 books I've ever read. I'm going to give it a rating of 4.5. The beginning, a solid 5. Got me right into the book right away. Interesting. It set the themes right up front. It set the conflict right up front between the husband and the wife. And immediately we go into what is interesting about the book. We find, the shoemaker finds Lost Evangeline. So interesting. And again, I've talked about this so often, but beginning, middle, and end, if you don't grab me right from the beginning, I'm not staying with you. And we have our next book that we're going to be diving in that I'm reading to my students. I almost gave it up. I was into it at, almost 30 pages? And it still had not grabbed me. And again, this is a common theme that I've always talked about. So the beginning, I gave it a 5. Middle, 4.5. At times it was a little boring, but it moved. And the ending, though, which we will talk about, I referenced in the last chapter, I gave it a 4. I mean, it was different, it was unique, but the fact that the ending was so quick and did not ultimately give us that satisfying part of the book where, yes, the shoemaker and Evangeline, we get to read about what it felt like when they finally got together. But no, it just left a mystery. And to myself and most of the class, we were left wanting. So I'll give that a 4, like I said. So let's start off right away and talk about the theme, the author's message, the conflict, the main idea. What was the whole purpose of the story? And I would argue right from the beginning, yes, you can look at all of these friends, the theme, and like I said, main idea, author's purpose. For a whole book like this, you can go in many different directions and you can take the point of view of different characters. But overall, I think Katie DeCamillo set up the book perfectly in the first chapter. Think about it. If you're going to pick one overarching theme, it goes back to, in my opinion, what Evangeline always said about herself, that her father always spoke to her about. I am clever, courageous, and kind. Each of those three words go through all of the stories that Katie DeCamillo has written, and every one is about, like you say, the Beauty and the Beast. It's a tale as old as time. This is the one I keep going back to, but it just is so right. It's all about love. And in this particular case, with the husband and wife, the shoemaker and his wife, sitting in front of that fire in the beginning of the book. And I had one student that alluded to this in terms of it being the best moment, the most memorable moment, the most interesting moment. And I agree, because it set up the book. Daring versus safety, dreaming versus reality, wanting, craving, longing, looking to go further in life, wanting something different versus just being set in your ways, stuck where you are, and just being satisfied with the life you are living now. And this is ultimately how the shoemaker goes forward. Yes, when Evangeline arrives in his boot, he could see that this is his vehicle for going to places that he had not gone to. His father had held him back so much in the beginning of his life that he referenced in the beginning of the chapter. Yes, ultimately he became a shoemaker like his father, but he was always looking to go out to the sea. He said he dreamed of being a sailor. And isn't it better here, as the wife said, to be here safe and warm with me? And the shoemaker said, yeah, I suppose, but I could have seen the world. What do you mean the world? The shoemaker's wife said. Isn't the world no matter where you go? Yes, but to sail the blue seas under the skies bright with stars. The stars, husband, the stars are right over your head right now. Are they not? Yes, yes. Wife comes back and says, be content with what you have. There is no point in thinking things would be different somewhere else. But yes, in fact, the shoemaker always wanted to go and change his life, move on from his life, and ultimately he's a dreamer. So this push-pull about dreaming, being courageous, wanting something different, being daring versus, again, realistic and just practical, right? This is the push-pull that ultimately you have with the wife and the husband in their life, which ultimately the husband wasn't satisfied, wasn't happy. And here arrives this little girl who is, in his eyes, magical, and now the child that they never had, yet the wife thinks that the child is not a human being, not real, not their purpose in life that has arrived finally. No, it's not a child. She says it's some magic trick. But as the first chapter wraps up, here is what the author writes that ultimately is so amazing. Evangeline. He named her Evangeline. It was to him a name full of joy and curiosity, daring and courage, a name that spoke of possibilities. So let's go through some categories here. The best moment in the book. And let's talk about, when you talk about moments, we're going to first talk about the best being the most uplifting moment in the book, right? And here's some of the nominees, and these come directly from my students. When Evangeline was first found in the boots, when actually I thought this was very interesting, and so many of these are interesting in terms of my students and what they are thinking, what resonates with them. One student said the shadows on the wall when she was in bed and she's dreaming, she's thinking, she's scared, right? Again, it goes back to being courageous, clever, courageous, and kind. I thought that was amazing. A lot of the students talked about all the scenes with the cat, how funny, how remarkable, how mean, and how pugnacious and really just pompous and over-the-top personality. This cat was just amazing. So one student pointed out, yes, how about when she meets the cat, their dialogue, and then ultimately at the very end when the cat leaves. The cat leaves Evangeline up on the hill. And ultimately also when the cat was, and this is coming from me, when the cat is speaking to the shoemaker and ultimately is calling him a fool and gets him to go out onto the ship. And then one insightful moment from a student that said, yeah, what about when the cat was reflecting and thinking back on Evangeline when the cat was on the ship and almost in its own way thanking Evangeline for coming into his life. Just so amazing. I will also say one more honorable mention in terms of best moments. Each time that the singer and Evangeline would sing, it would be short, to the point, not overbearing, not too much, just enough. It just felt good. But ultimately, here is the best moment. It's, in my opinion, yes, page 132, towards the end, it's all about Timothy trying to talk to Evangeline and Evangeline trying to talk to Timothy. Evangeline getting out of that cage. And it goes back to the theme that I talked about, this push-pull about being safe or being daring, accepting who you are and your fate in life or not accepting that. And where is this evident? Because it was about Timothy being afraid of letting Evangeline out of the cage, and Stumphoff, his master, would be upset at him. He would be punished if he ended up letting Evangeline out. But no, Evangeline convinced him. And she says in this one moment, through the persuasion of telling Timothy about a better life out there, just as her father had instilled in her, just as she inherently believed in all of her being, she says, Timothy leans forward. He puts his face right up against the cage, thinking, is he going to let her out? Do you truly promise to sing to me if I let you out of the cage? And Evangeline says, I do. Open the door, Timothy. Please. Even though Timothy is risking everything in that one moment to open the cage, he does it. And his life is changed forever for the better, no question. And yes, Evangeline ultimately goes on and lives the life that she had always wanted. Okay, the worst moment in the book. Here's some nominations. Evangeline ultimately just being stuck in the cage. And again, this is all from my students and certainly ones that I just throw in here. The moment that the shoemaker's wife sells Evangeline to Bristol. Horrible, right? And when Evangeline comes back to the shoemaker's business, she can't find him. She knows in that moment that he's gone, right? Timothy relaying his previous life and with his mother's passing away. A student had brought that up. It wasn't even on my radar. Stumphoff, in that moment that he's looking at Evangeline and explaining what her life would be now, and he's just smiling. It's so evil. You've got to have a character in every story that's kind of like the antagonist versus the protagonist, the bad versus good, evil versus kind, and he is the tough guy, he's the bad guy. And ultimately, when he captures, right, he takes that net and he captures her up on the rock. Clearly, we also had a nomination for when the shoemaker's out there looking for Evangeline and he sees the paw prints of the cats and sees the footprints of Evangeline, and then all of a sudden they disappear and he's thinking the worst. So ultimately, I think most of the students, and I definitely agree, the worst moment of the book is when the shoemaker's wife sells Evangeline. And along with this, the most haunting moment is she then later on regrets what she did, and she's sitting there counting the money, touching the money, going through the money. And yes, ultimately, as the reader, we realize that by doing this, by never touching Evangeline's room, at the end, she regrets what she did, and she's haunted by it. So that one scene where she's just by herself in this house with no one else around, and she's just literally touching the money, going through it, not counting it like she's happy, but yes, haunted by the fact of what she did. The ends was a big discussion. Did you like the end? Did you not like the end? Ultimately, out of 20, and 20 being 19 students and myself, 12 did not like the ending, and 8 did. So it is interesting. I thought it was going to be more of didn't like the ending, but the mysterious part that ultimately, yes, we do come to the understanding that they ultimately found each other, but it was still where most of us did not like the ending, but it was closer than I thought. So, best characters. Overwhelmingly, everyone liked Evangeline. Number 2, definitely the shoemaker. Number 3, the cat. Worst characters, no question, the shoemaker's wife. Number 2, clearly Stumphoff. And, Timothy was right up there as well with some of the best characters. But in terms of characters that you could have done without that weren't necessary in the book, everyone pointed to Miss Penrith Smith. What was her deal? Why did we introduce her? It just seemed to be something that it was a lost opportunity. We could have gone plenty of places with her. She seemed to be very similar to the Countess in the Hotel Balzar. But ultimately, we also had some nominations for the bird and the mouse, who quickly came into the book and just corresponded with Evangeline, but definitely a character that just seemed to not have any reason to be in the book was Miss Penrith Smith. And there obviously was an understanding of why she needed to be there, but it just seemed to be more of a lost opportunity. She was there in the book, and she was gone right away. And how about this? Here we go, another category. The best piece of memorabilia from the book. What would you take if you had to take any item, any object from the book? And yes, overwhelmingly, and I had brought this up with the students, no question, the little lantern, right? This ultimately is the lanterns in that museum at the end of the book, and it's how they found each other, because there's no mystery at the end. You know that they found each other. There were some other nominations that I thought were fantastic. One student loved her little bed, and then obviously with that, basically all her furniture, her dresser that ultimately was never touched, like I said, after she left the house. We had the Paulina, the ship, even though that's not something you can bring with you, if there was some type of replica of that ship, it's a little ship. The painting, the ghostly painting of the parrot, the mermaid, and that cat man on the wall in Stumphoff's home. The crow's nest, that rock from the crow's nest up on top of the hill. And yes, one student brought up, of course, the boot that she was found in. What left you wanting, other than the ending? What was something that you missed, that you wanted as part of the story? In my mind, this was all me, and I brought this up multiple times. What's with Evangeline's backstory? Where did she come from? Again, she was a baby, but where'd she live? Who originally owned her? How'd she end up in the boot? It would have been nice to have known that backstory. That could have been a simple flashback. But as I've said many times throughout these episodes with Katie DeCamillo, she's just brilliant. And I would encourage you, she has her own podcast now where she goes into her writing process and how she comes up with her stories. And what I found is so remarkable, and I've talked to my students a lot about this. Very often she has no idea where she's going. And that's anathema to a lot of authors in terms of having an outline right from the beginning, knowing the ending before you start. But she was saying the opposite, that she's not sure where she's going. And it's in that vein that I think, in this one particular point that I'm making, that she missed an opportunity. But again, I'm sure she reflected on that. And listen, I'm the biggest fan of this author out there. So you need to have some constructive criticism here and there. And that's one particular item about this book that I would have liked to have known. And certainly with the ending, what ultimately happened with that, I think that was a big deal, like I've talked about in the beginning of the podcast. How about this category? Cause and effect, the trophy for knowing, predicting what will happen next. Because this happened, this will happen in the future. And this is what great readers do. As they're reading, they're picking up on signals. And yes, the winner of this category, cause and effect, unintended consequences. When the shoemaker's wife hated that sound of the hinge screeching as the door opened to the shoemaker's workshop, you knew that once the wife was fixing that hinge on the door, that now it wouldn't make any noise as customers come into the shoemaker's workshop, and people will find Evangeline, because that was the warning for Evangeline to know that she needed to hide. Best written sentence from a figurative language point of view, just what it is, not necessarily the best line in terms of its impact and how you feel as a reader, but something that's coming from the craft of the author. I'll just give you two, and I'll let you know my favorite. Talking about the hinges on the door, and so it was good that the hinges on the door to the cobbler's shop were rusty, and that they made a small complaining sound whenever the door was open. A complaining sound. Isn't that so simple, but so effective? That was on page 15. Right there after that page, it's almost like she's in her element, Katie DeCamillo, and she's firing off these other great lines. Page 16, as Evangeline she's listening to the conversation with the customers and her father, the shoemaker, and she's waiting for everything to be over. The author writes, she listened to the rise and fall of conversation. Again, maybe I'm going too much overboard here with this, but the rise and fall of conversation, just think and picture that, and how, again, simple that is, but so effective. And I'll give you a third one. Page 32. When Miss Penrith Smith she's sickly, she's under the covers, and listen to this, she's actually silent. The old widow fell silent, worrying the bed covers with her hands. Worrying the bed covers. You can picture this, right? The bed covers, they don't worry. This is personification, taking something that's not human and giving it a human quality. This is figurative language. What's happening? She's shaking, right? And she's pulling on those bed covers, which we can all picture in our mind, and the bed covers are saying, what's going on? What's going on? But ultimately, the best line by far is what we've gone over before. Evangeline saying it to herself, saying it out loud, that I'm clever, courageous, and kind. The shoemaker said that she's a gift, And Evangeline said that she is beloved. And we'll wrap up the podcast here. Not specifically lines, but dialogue, the best dialogue that is so memorable coming out of this book. And this is coming directly from my students, not particular actual words that are said, but the dialogue in terms of what they remember. One student definitely talked about the conversation that the cat was having initially with Evangeline and how Evangeline actually, and I'll give it to you verbatim what she said about the name of the cat. This is on page 69. After they're going back and forth, and now she's convinced the cat to go with her, and they're just going back and forth and arguing, and the author writes, Evangeline felt a wave of frustration roll through her. She thought that if she were in charge of naming the Marmalade cat, she would call her Expect Nothing of Me. Next was definitely the dialogue with Timothy at the very end with Evangeline. The dialogue that was going through the shoemaker's head when he found Evangeline's footprints in the snow, and he was worried about whether, the cat had somehow maybe eaten Evangeline or killed Evangeline. The dialogue that happened again in Evangeline's head when she came and arrived at the shoemaker's workshop and said, no, Papa's not here. One student brought up again the dialogue in the beginning of the book, which was so insightful, how they talked back and forth and set up the whole book, the shoemaker and his wife. And again, one student apparently thought it was fantastic, that moment that they jumped out the window where she was with the cat. And as she again spoke to the cat and instructed the cat to keep going to find her father. Friends, I think we've covered everything in this great book, Lost Evangeline by Katie DeCamillo. Ultimately, a 4.5 is the rating out of 5. Right there at the top of the list of one of the best books I have read with my students in our book clubs, in class. Until next time, reach out to me at kevmok21@gmail.com. Questions, comments, anything, feedback, requests on certain books that you'd like to hear. And until next time, have fun and keep learning.